let's talk really briefly about Arcade Fire, because they make really cool music sometimes. What's so great about Arcade Fire? Well, first of all, what we must establish straight off is that Suburbs is the best Arcade Fire album, and Funeral is the worst. This is just how it is. Like, Funeral is like the first album they made. Arcade Fire was kind of trying to find their place. Then they made Neon Bible, which I don't have a vinyl of for some reason. At least not on the wall. I probably have it somewhere. No, I don't, actually. Because I don't. But Suburbs is the best album because it took the elements of the first two albums and perfected them. It took the very light-hearted and cheerful aspects of Neon Bible, and it took the kind of government-orientated themes of Funeral, put them together, and threw a little bit of synth pop on top of it, and we got this album. We also took elements from Reflector, which were about the post-apocalyptic World War III. And so we take albums 1, 2, and 4, and they put them together and made this album instead, The Suburbs. It is an absolutely beautiful album because it follows the life story... shut up, Peter. Nobody asked you to turn on. The why Suburbs is so great is it follows the life story of the fictional character Toby Manchester. And where it starts is Toby lives in the suburb. Like, you would think that the story would start out with Toby living in the suburbs, but actually it is a dream he's had since he is a very small child, and he lives out in the middle of the desert. Now, the entire point of this album is this small kid, this Arabian kid named Tobey Maguire, to kind of compose himself a little bit more and figure out how to get himself into the American life of the suburbs that he's always wanted, and how to get away with it without dealing with the extreme racism of the New Yorkers in the suburbs. Because Tony obviously sings about in the songs that he is kind of hated in his own community, and how even when he moves to the suburbs in New York, he will still be hated by by the people around him in the burbs because they are blatantly racist toward Islamic individuals, as is seen in tracks 2 and 3 in the album. I really like the flow of this album, how it follows the story of the boy. It kind of goes from sand to rock to just bedrock, giant stones, and then it goes to mud, and then it goes to water, which truly represents what the suburbs is about. It is right next to all the water parks, and the transitions from sand to gravel as Tony begins to climb this one mountain to change to hard rock before he goes on the other side and comes into this mud pit. And the mud transitions to water, which leads him in a sewer pipe, which takes him through this very dark chasm through like tracks 7 through 9 of the album before coming out into the water park in the suburbs. And then all of a sudden he gets to try and live there and fit in and see how life is going for him. Because this is the part of the album where, of course, he meets Marie Callender, who is a girl who lives in the suburbs. And she is a beautiful woman that Tony meets, and he wants to fuck. What he does is he ends up stealing some rats out of someone's basement and selling them for meat to the local butcher, earning enough money and taking the girl to this water park in this album. And just the absolute mind-bogglingness of the story building that has happened in this album is something I really don't see in other music like this. It's honestly absolutely amazing. This is story building that is very straightforward and obviously shown through the songs, not dissimilar to The Ball by Pink Floyd or The Serpents from Down Under by Lizzie McGuire. And it makes this album all that much more appreciative because it is really setting the bar that much higher for... Oops. Oh yes, the story building in this album makes the tracks flow together, honestly, nearly perfectly well. It's something to be amazed at, if I'm being quite honest. But yeah, so he ends up, Tony and Marie end up hanging out in this water park, and there's kind of some really bubbly K-pop songs on here, like the, how Kiro Kiro Bonito shows up in this album to have a some guest lyrics for Marie in the song. Because up to this point, we only hear Tony do any of the singing, so it's very nice to hear this voice kick in. That's just absolutely represents the New York suburb life, to getting the accent and the voice down utterly perfect. It makes the album feel incredibly immersive, and I really like that. And of course the album kind of goes on where he kind of begins to fit into this life, dealing with the Islamic racism that Tony has grown up with. But he ends up getting used to it, and Tony begins to enjoy these occasional beatings he gets by these individuals in the suburbs as he grows up with his girlfriend Marie, and they become married, and they begin to have kids, and that's kind of where the album goes. And then it begins to take a kind of dark turn where the next World War begins, and Tony's kids are now have to be drafted into the military. This change in style to include these heavy black Swedish metal guitars and the instrumentation really, I think, liven up the album as it talks about the deep and depressing aspects of this war Tony's kids go through, and how they constantly think back to the water park that they grew up with as little kids. And this motif that was used in the water park song, Splashes and Bubbles, is now reused in these black metal songs. It's almost like this kind of callback, back and forth, and how it's come into, like, the song comes into this absolute full glory with these power metal chords. It's just absolutely something to really look at. I utterly enjoyed it. As this was like the third leg of the album, because this is, of course, a double LP, one of Fire Arcade's greatest works, and the fourth leg kind of goes on about how one of Tony's kids die and Tony grows old and becomes to kind of fall apart. I like how this takes the aspects of a funeral and kind of incorporates it back in. That was, like, obviously in the title of the album. We did have this callback to it from Funeral. Like, we see a funeral held for one of his kids who ended up dying in the war in this album. And how Tony is Islamic, and they're fighting the Islams in this war. And it's very interesting how these kids have grown up in the Quran faith in the suburbs, but they are fighting in this war, so it feels like they're very torn together. This kind of deep, guttural sounds that come out of the album in this part that just really signify this hatred, this deep passion and feeling for violence and death and confusion come forth. And they finally get wrapped up into the funeral part of this album. The very last part of this album is actually most of Funeral just remixed to throw over this as the last 2 or 3 songs of the album. I think with the new mastering techniques and story writing and songwriting skills that Hips Butler has come up with for the last stretch of this album really show forward from how much he moved from the first to the 4th album he has made. And that's my review for The Suburbs. I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this one. If you like this video, please subscribe. I plan to do this content more regularly. That is the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching. Stay fresh. But he ends up getting used to it, and he does actually begin to enjoy the occasional beatings he gets. This is not okay. And so Tony begins to enjoy these occasional beatings he's... No! No, I can't say it with a straight face! God damn it!